So, good evening, y'all. Took a while to get going here. Got a question here from Martha, who says, I understand you're working on love for the schools. And it's getting to be true. I've outlined the most of the content for love in the classroom and done a fair bit of the work on it. I'm just now finishing the work on love in the workplace. In fact, just finished the rough draft yesterday. And so we'll be getting to love in the classroom pretty soon. He said, how are you touching on issues? I've been involved with school-wide basic skills testing, and it is such an empty and afraid environment. Gee, no kidding. My love group asked me if I could still be happy around that, and I practiced that today, and I actually enjoyed today. I also found that I had more energy at the end of the day. When I don't practice being empty and afraid and make other choices, how about that? Oh, absolutely. It's been my discovery that, and this is something we're going to talk about in the Real Life Classroom book, as well as we do in pretty much all the Real Life books. It's our discovery that no matter what environment you're in, whether you're in the workplace or whether you're a teacher or whatever, no matter what your environment, if you bring love into it, everything you do becomes easier and more fruitful simultaneously. I had a mother recently who was describing raising an impossible child, and she said it was impossible. Everything was fruitless. She started to apply the principles of real love, and within days, she's saying, "You're kidding." The changes are phenomenal. I hear people tell me that in the workplace, in the classroom. There was a lady in New Mexico somewhere who was telling me that after 20 years in the classroom, she hated going to school. She hated No Child Left Behind. She hated the school-wide basic skills testing like you're talking about. She hated the increasingly empty and afraid environment. She was just hating her job. And without the job changing at all, as she was feeling more loved outside the job, taking that to the job, she was discovering that it was really completely changing the way that she felt and the way she was functioning. Now, as a bonus, she was also experiencing that it was changing the way that other people were reacting to her, which should be no great surprise. In an empty and afraid environment, if even one person comes into an empty and afraid environment and feels loved, what do you think can happen? Now, I'm not exaggerating. Let's say that, for example, you've got you're out lost in the woods, and there are 20 people lost in the woods. They've been lost for days, and they're starving to death, and one person shows up who says, "Oh, well, I know the way out of the woods." What do you think the 20 people are going to do who are lost in the woods? They're going to throng around this person and be willing to do anything that person says. They're going to follow them anywhere. And that's kind of the effect that people have when they're loving. People just tend to naturally be attracted to them and follow them and want to be led by them. So you're going to discover that as a teacher or an administrator or whatever. People are drawn to people who are loving. Natural phenomenon. Well, you're coming up with some questions. A lady who wrote me the other day said that her 5-year-old was chewing some gum that got somehow stuck to her leg. I'm assuming that the gum first came out of her mouth before it got stuck to her leg, unless the child has very unusual chewing habits. And then it got all tangled up with her leg hairs. And she got most of it pulled off, and so here she is with this gum that's hair in it. She's messing around with it. The mother said, "Go put it in the trash." And the child said no. Well, the first mistake is telling the child to put it in the trash. Watch the kid. I mean, the kid is got the gum all tangled up with hair, and the kid's going to do one of two things with the gum, usually. The kid's going to put the gum in the trash by herself, or the kid's going to put it back in her mouth. And whichever she does, what do you care? So leave her alone. Don't tell people what to do unless they're clearly doing something that's going to be harmful. So she tells her to put it in the trash, and the kid says, predictably, no. So then the mother asks her, it says her half a dozen times, patiently put it in the trash. And the kid refuses each time. And it became a contest of wills. So, it's becoming kind of a screaming fit. And the mother's holding their smaller child, and it's just becoming an increasingly unpleasant experience. The kid would not put the gum in the trash, so eventually the mother goes, and instead of making the child put the gum in the trash, the mother did a clever thing. I think she read this in the parenting book. She decided she would just go into the bathroom, take the smaller child with her, and dissociate herself from the child who was refusing to put the gum in the garbage. And then the kid kind of had a fit, who wasn't going to put the gum in the garbage, and eventually then did put the gum in the trash. So, one of the lessons that we learn here is people really don't like being told what to do. And so on the whole, if we can wait and see what they're going to do, they're going to win. And in the second place, she might have said to her daughter, for example, if the kid, for example, put the gum on the carpet, then she could say to the kid, whose name is Heather, so Heather, if the gum's on the carpet, what will happen? Ask her questions instead of telling her what to do. The law of choice is absolutely critical. It's like we have this little meter inside of us, a little alarm, and when people tell us what to do, we get resentful, we fight. So if the gum's left on the carpet, what's going to happen? Somebody's going to step on it, somebody's going to get stuck on them. Would you like it if I took gum and stuck it all over you? No, clearly you wouldn't. In fact, that's why you put it on the carpet and didn't stick it all over your body, because you don't like gum all over you. So where does the gum go? So would you take care of that? Kids respond to that lots better than being told what to do. So it's a good thing to remember with kids. There are two things you can do. Give the kid a choice. You don't have to put the gum in the garbage. You can always chew it. I mean, if a kid wants to take gum that's, got hair in it and been on the floor and put it in her mouth, what do you care? Her mouth's a lot dirtier than the floor. But making kids do stuff is usually just fraught with disaster. So is making adults do things. And boy, we do that a lot, trying to make people do stuff. Don't do it. They're going to react badly. And I reemphasize that the law of choice is just absolutely the most important principle in relationships. And any time you go to violate it, beware. And I hear that question a lot. How do I get somebody to do something? I wouldn't. You're not going to like the result. For those of you who just joined us, I just finished yesterday the rough draft for the Real Love in the Workplace book, so that'll be coming out for too long. Looking forward to that. Here's Martha saying, my sister committed suicide recently and I continue to grieve. I used to be able to put her pictures out, but now I have to put them away and can't look at them. I found that I couldn't read her old emails because they make me too sad, and of course empty and afraid. No matter how much I bring the subject of this loss to my Real Love group, there's just too much emptiness for me. I do feel loved by the group and others, but there just doesn't seem like there's the love I want because I want it for my sister. No one can replace her. I miss her so much. And you just said it very well. And that is that we have an insistence, really, on being loved by a particular person. And, you know, I'm not going to tell you not to do that. Gosh, we get to grieve as long as we want to. But our pain is generated by us. We always have a choice. We can grieve over the loss of someone, or we can rejoice in every minute that we got to spend with them. Gosh, what if you hadn't got to spend any time at all with her? So you can spend your time just reminiscing and being thrilled with the moments of love that you got with her, or you can grieve. Grieving is an incredibly negative way of seeing somebody. It's wishing for what you can't have. It's wishing that something can be different. It's not appreciating what we did have. It's really a choice to be miserable. And, you know, for a while, after somebody's death, it's pretty understandable. Gosh, we miss them. After a while, what we're saying is that the only love and happiness that we could possibly have in our lives is that which would come from that one person. And it's a pretty limited way of seeing love and happiness. Can you say something, Yvonne says, can you say something about situations in the world such as the shootings that happened at the Virginia College yesterday? Was the shooter simply empty, afraid, and unloved? How can the friends and loved ones of the victims be loving in such a situation? How can any of us wrap our minds around this kind of thing? Actually, it's pretty easy to wrap our minds around it. I'm stunned that this kind of thing doesn't happen a great deal more than it does. Now, some people who do things like this are genuinely psychotic. But, I mean, you know, they're nuts. But most are not. Most have been functioning pretty normally up to the time that they did this kind of stuff. And you hear that all the time. Oh, he was such a nice man. You would never have thought that he would do such a thing. Over and over, the people who are the perpetrators in such shootings, as they interview the people who knew them, over and over we discover that they were loners, that they didn't have friends, that they felt alienated. Often they felt victimized. Many of the younger kids were bullied. They felt deprived in some way. And it's really understandable. If you get to the point where you're in enough pain, where you're empty and afraid enough, you will be willing to do almost anything to alleviate your pain. And if I feel empty and alone and helpless and worthless and unconnected to people and weak, one way to not feel weak and one way to not feel helpless and alone, one way to feel at least briefly really connected to people and strong and powerful and in control is to pick up a gun. Poof. I've talked to many parents who said to me, gosh, why does my kid have such a fascination with guns? Power. It's an instant source of power. You pick up a gun and everybody around you instantly respects or fears you, don't they? Pretty hard to ignore somebody who walks into a room with a loaded gun. And so it's really not too tough to understand. Now then, after they've done a thing like this, you could spend the rest of your life being angry at them, but it's like the example that we've used many times before, being angry at a drowning person. And you know, you say, well, but this isn't a especially bad thing. You know, we think that just because somebody kills something that somehow then they don't count as drowning. It's really all the same. many years ago, one of my kids was sexually molested, and it isn't any different. It doesn't matter whether you're simply discounted, ignored, disrespected, sexually abused, hit, or murdered. The people who do these things are empty and afraid. And that doesn't make it okay, but it makes it very understandable. And we can spend the rest of our lives being angry at them and wishing vengeance on them and wishing that it was not so and wishing that the sword of justice would come down and kill them and protect us, but that's not going to happen. Everybody gets to make their own choices, including empty and afraid people. So we don't get to change that. We only get to make choices for us. So we can now focus on, oh, how could such a terrible thing happen? Now look at my attitude. As soon as I go, oh, woe is me, how could such... I've jumped right in the victim pool with everybody else. And now I'm helpless to help anybody. I'm helpless to help people feel loving. I'm helpless to help people be happy. Or I can choose to be loving. I can choose to understand why somebody would do such a thing and focus on loving the families of the victims, or loving those who are wounded, or whatever I can do. The instant I claim to be victimized, the instant I become angry, I add to the fear and anger in the world. I don't really think we need any more fear and anger in the world, do you? In fact, as soon as I become angry, I add to the anger in the world just as real a way as the man who killed those people did. So we make it far worse. In fact, we continue the perpetration if we vent our anger at him. We multiply the damage manyfold. Or we can be loving and really change the picture. I've seen many families now of people who have been killed, sexually abused, and so on, as they have forgiven and even come to love the perpetrators, have utterly changed the cycle of anger. That's what the world needs more of. So, not too tough to understand. Let me know if any of that's confusing. Somebody says, in spite of having an intellectual understanding that other people's anger isn't about me personally, why do we insist that other people's emptiness and fear causes us to be empty and afraid? It's kind of like the ancient Greeks used to do with their gods. Something happens, we got to have an explanation. And got to have something. So if something happens and I'm in pain, I got two ways to go. And if you're close by, I could say, let's see, I'm in pain because I am not sufficiently loving, because I have not been sufficiently prepared. No, I don't want to entertain that possibility. That would require work on my part. Or I could blame it on you. Duh. So I'm going to blame it on you. I mean, wherever possible, we take the easier route. And in the short run, it appears to be so easy to blame other people. You hurt me. And look at the evidence everywhere we go. Today already you've seen in the paper, look what the shooter did to these families of the victims. You saw recently Don, I think you pronounce it Imus, the radio talk show host, who made fun of the Rutgers women's basketball team and called them some racial epithets. And, they just cut him up. And in the newspaper it said, he meets with the team that he hurt. He didn't hurt anybody. He was just a butthead. He was insensitive. He was unkind. He was inconsiderate. He was a bigot. He was rude. But hello, he was hired to be those things. He's been doing that for 30 years, and everybody knows that's what he is. It's like the story, of the Indian who's up on top of the mountain, and everybody's heard this. And, the snake says, and it's cold up there, snake says, "Oh, I'm freezing to death. Please take me down off the top of the mountain." So, the Indian says, "Well, but you're going to bite me." "Oh, no, I won't bite you." So the Indian puts him, next to his chest and takes him down the mountain, and as the snake warms up, he bites the Indian. And the Indian's going, "Well, wait a minute. I'm helping you, and you bit me." And the snake goes, "Fool, I'm a snake. It's what I do." Well, that's what this guy does. The guy's rude and inconsiderate, and that's what he does for a living. It's what he does for entertainment. It's what he does for his job to attract an audience. And then we're surprised when he uses racial epithets against the women's basketball team, and everybody acts all victimized. Hello? When I was, years ago, I spent 2 years in the islands of Samoa. And for a couple of years, for long periods of time, I'd be the only white boy for, as far as the eye could see, for months at a time. I was the only white kid. And as I would walk along it's not streets, the paths, the dirt paths of Samoa, the little Samoan kids would line up along the side of the road and shout, "Palangi, palangi," which is exactly their equivalent of nigger, nigger for a white person. And it's my choice whether I'm offended by that or not. Nobody can hurt your feelings. Nobody can victimize you. Nobody can cause you to be empty and afraid without your permission, without your participation. Now, in our defense, if all we've ever known is emptiness and fear, we don't know that real love's even a choice. If you can't see a choice, it doesn't exist. And so even though the choice is there, if we don't see it, it doesn't exist for us. But still, we can't blame the other people. But these people can't cause us to be miserable. The cause is within us. The cause is from things that we were taught or not taught from the time we were little kids. And we have choices whereby we can either be happy or not happy in any given moment of any day. It's always the case. But, we love to blame, don't we? I can work or blame you. I'll blame you. It's faster. Ironically, though, even though it's easier in the short run, blaming you is a lot of work, isn't it? In the long run? Because I blame you, and then what do? Then you fight me and argue with me and act like a victim with me and blame me back, and then I have to argue with you, and I have to come up with a better reason to blame you than you have to blame me. And in the long run, getting and protecting behaviors are more work than loving. But if I've never seen loving, it's all I know. Kind of stuck, aren't we? You're going to see a lot of victimhood from this Virginia shooting. And it's important to note that when people do things like that to us without our permission, we are victims. But we always have a choice whether we feel like victims and act like victims. So, if I come up to you and punch you in the face, you're a victim. But it's up to you whether you choose to feel and act like one completely. We have a lady right now who's logged on, whose name is Jill, who lives in, actually I don't know where she is right now, but she lives in Vancouver, and I think right now she's either in Vancouver or she's in China, but her husband lives in China and she lives in Vancouver. It's pretty far apart. And he attacks her pretty often. But it's her choice whether she's offended. And she can tell you that on the occasions that she chooses to be offended and chooses to defend herself, it goes badly every stinking time. And on the occasions that she just says, my fault, you're right, I do that, it melts him like butter. In fact, here's Jill speaking. She says, I admitted my mistakes again in the conflicts with my husband, and I've experienced another effect of telling the truth. Frankly speaking, I did not have much faith before I see it happening in front of my eyes with my husband. I used to think he was impossible. Now I really see the effect of real love. I continue to stumble on expectations a lot, and I'm working on it, but now I can see all the effort is worth it. So here was a lady I was just talking about, and she's saying that she's beginning to see the fruits of being loving. And see, a lot of the problem that she's had is that she tries real love a little. So she'll love him a little bit until he attacks her. And then when he attacks her, I mean, it's easy to love people when they're nice, huh? So she would love him when he was nice, but as soon as he would attack her, she'd get her back up and defend herself and claim to be right, and then, duh, what did he do after that? Well, then he'd attack her more. And then she'd go, oh, how could I possibly get along with this monster? He's impossible. When the truth is, she never really adequately tried loving him when he was awful. So on several occasions now, she's tried just telling him, no, I'm not going to defend myself. It was my mistake. You're right. And she's watched him just melt right in front of her eyes. It's really a pretty remarkable experience. Here's a men's group saying, I've decided to leave a relationship to continue working more on myself. How can I deal with the lure of using imitation love, in other words, sex, other things, to keep a focus on becoming more loving instead of giving in to the imitation love with my soon-to-be ex-partner and remain friends while I'm learning to be more loving? I would suggest you get a whole lot of help from the guys in your group, but one of the suggestions that I have is, you're talking here about remaining friends with your ex-partner. I would suggest you not do that. It's really a pretty big mistake. I mean, it's something that we see in movies. Well, we'll break up, but we'll still be friends. Well, that looks really cute and all, but it doesn't work. Because, see, you've already established that you have this unhealthy relationship with this person. You've already proven that. And now what you're saying is, we're going to separate and not be in an intimate, exclusive relationship, but we'll still be friends. How could you possibly be healthy friends? You couldn't be. You've already proven you can't have a healthy relationship of any kind. So what I suggest to people is that you say to her, does it say her? It doesn't. Might be a him. I don't know. But you say to her, I am not loving enough. Don't blame it on her. I'm not loving enough to be in this relationship or, frankly, any relationship. And so I need to learn how to be in a relationship. So for a period of blank, I don't know, but I recommend to people usually a minimum of 3 to 4 months, I need to have no contact at all. Why? Because there's something wrong with her? No. Because you are incapable of having healthy interactions with her. And being around her will drag you right into the pit of using imitation love again. You also need to be really careful to not immediately start into another relationship. Men and women are famous for this. They leave their partner and then say, I'm going to do this differently. I'll start up another relationship 6 hours later. No, you're going to blow that one too, because you're the same person. So what I would do is, when your entire men's group says you're ready to be in an intimate relationship again, then do it. that may be a good while. See if that helps. Martha says, isn't rejecting people who harm us verbally a safe way to play? I left home at 16 to get away from my mother's verbal and physical abuse. I tried at times to mend bridges, but when she was ready, I wasn't, and when I was, she wasn't. She really made it impossible to have a relationship with her. I chose to stay away. I can love her now that she's dead. Yeah, it does make it easier sometimes. And can understand her bipolar ways. I just couldn't love her, and she couldn't bond with me from childhood. What I do now is just try to practice being more loving to people like that, as I can't go back, and I don't want to feel so much remorse about not being able to when I was younger. How do children and teens learn these concepts if their parents keep staying empty and afraid of attacking? Yeah, there's a lot of questions in there. But if there's somebody who, every time you're around them, empties you out, stay away from them. Notice I said that to the man who said, I'm breaking up with my girlfriend and how to be friends. Don't be around her. It won't work. It's too hard. You were talking about being around your mother. It's too hard. And I think the same person who was talking about, I think you're the same person who said that your sister killed herself. Well, gee, little wonder, huh? I mean, your mother couldn't love you. So what are the odds that your mother could unconditionally love? Let me make sure I'm talking about the same person. Yes. So if your mother couldn't love you, what are the odds that your mother could unconditionally love your sister? 0. So is it any wonder why your sister killed herself? So you were wise to stay away from your mother. Now, what's the difference between running and being wise and staying away from her? Easy. Fear. I mean, if you run from somebody, you do it out of fear, and you do it mostly involuntarily. So, I'm having a conversation with you, and I get all angry and afraid, and I stomp out of the room. Well, look what I'm doing. I'm doing it out of fear, and I'm doing it really without making a conscious decision. It's almost an involuntary protecting behavior. Whereas when I say to myself, I'm just not loving enough to be around this person. It empties me out every time. I'd be a whole lot better off if I spent time around more loving people and avoided this person who I'm just not loving enough to handle. That's not running. That's making a smart choice. So rather than lament that choice the rest of your life, that's stupid. You did the best you could at the time. There's nothing you can do about that. Silly to feel guilty about doing the best you could at the time. All you can do now is learn to be as unconditionally loving as possible and love the people around you. Whoever. You don't even have to love people like her. You don't even have to necessarily love people, for example, in your family. Simply love people. That's really our only obligation in this life. And it's to learn to love first the people who are easiest to love. I mean, when you're learning to play baseball, they don't send you to your first batting practice to the major leagues because you'll be killed. It would be so overwhelming to have that experience, you'd never want to play again. Same thing in relationships. Lighten up. Same reason I told that man to stay away from his ex-girlfriend. Too hard. She's the major leagues for him. He needs to learn how to feel unconditionally loved by and to unconditionally love other men before he goes to try to unconditionally love a woman that he's in an intimate relationship with, where things get a lot more complicated and more involved and distracting with imitation love. So do the easy things first, only because that's the sensible way to practice. Now, the Scottsdale group says, I get what you said about my not being loving enough to participate in any kind of relationship right now, but how do I deal with the financial obligations we both incurred together over the course of our relationship in a loving way? We have another man who is struggling during his divorce for these same reasons. How can we be loving when we have finances or children or other obligations we need to handle together? Easy. You keep your discussions with this other person solely to that subject. So, let's say that with your girlfriend, for example, you incurred financial obligations. So, you would say to her, I am not loving enough to be in this relationship. I'm the problem. So, I have to stay away from you because I'm too stupid. I screw it up. I dive right back into the pit. I go right back into acting like a victim or attacking or whatever it is you do. And you say, but I recognize that I have financial obligations with you. So what we'll do is we do need to work out those. And so if possible, for example, to work out payment of bills and so on, we could work those out by email. We need to, or we could work them out even by phone, but we need to limit our discussions. It's better to work them out in as dispassionate a way as possible. But we need to work them out. As we work them out, we need to keep our contact only about those things and not talk about anything else. So that's really important.